Good evening. It's an unusual pleasure to me to be able to address a shipping-oriented audience. Quite normally, because the subject is so esoteric, I have to sort of carry people along. I hope I can do less of that tonight because I think that my audience will probably even recognize some of these scams as I describe them, and who knows, there may be even some victims among you. If you're currently in that situation, see me after the talk. So, I certainly would like to thank Marco and thank UTC Overseas, and I certainly do appreciate, and I find the opportunity, and I find it a great honor. I've spent the last 25 years in the shipping business, and I've seen a lot of different things, and I kind of, in the side, I got into the shipping business in the Haiti trade. So I don't think you'll ever find a more lawless trade than the Haiti trade, or the Caribbean in general. So it was a sort of a rude awakening to me to how business can be conducted without any rule or any sort of after the fact sort of ability to go to a court. So in a ship, I don't know if in your business, I think it's a little bit different, but in the trade that a lot of my clients operate in, whatever you get in the deal is what you walk away with. There's no arbitration, there's no court, there's no judgment you can go to. Oh, you can sue your charterer if you want to, but you might as well save your money. So I would tonight like to talk a little bit about basically I'd like to educate you on how to steal ships. After all, shipping is ships. The ships are the sine qua non of shipping. Without ships, there would be no shipping. So essentially, whoever owns the ship has, he's in charge. Everybody else has to turn to the ship owner. And how do you get a ship? Well, the old sort of straight way to do it was to buy it. But why would you do that when you don't have to? When you can get it by some other means? So, how do shipping scams originate? They originate in the way that shipping has been done I'm sorry, this light is, it's hard for me to see you because I have this light in my eyes. But anyway, shipping, of course, as we all know, is about 4,000 years old. And many of the laws that we still have today in shipping, many of the maritime laws, are more than 2,000 years old. The concept, for example, of general average, which is a rather unique concept and is only found in shipping, had its basis in the Roman days when the owner of the cargo had to travel with the cargo because there was no way of communicating to the port where the cargo would be discharged. And so if you had a bunch, let's say 5 or 6 cargo owners on board your ship, and you were going to have to do something to hurt the ship in order to save the ship and its cargo, then you would call, and today we still have general average, in which after the fact, the cargo owners have to contribute to the, whatever it was, the loss that was involved with the cargo. In those days, it was very interesting. In order to declare general average, one of the owners of the cargo would have to get a small piece of his cargo and throw it over the side of the ship and declare each owner had to declare general average by throwing part of his cargo over the side. And we no longer throw the cargo over the side, but we still have general average, and it's a unique and rather strange concept. Charter party, for example. We all know what a charter party is. But do you know that the word charter party comes from carta partita, or torn letter? The Roman phrase meant that in the Roman days, a bill of lading was 2 contracts on one piece of paper, which was then torn in half. The master got the top half, the owner of the cargo got the bottom half, and he could sell that bottom half to anybody he wanted. And when the ship got to the discharge port, the receiver who had bought the cargo would show his bottom half of the page, and the master would look and see if the two matched exactly, that guy got the cargo. If they didn't, he didn't. So it was a pretty ingenious solution for a time that had no internet, and we'll no longer see carta partitas, but we still have charter parties. Well, how would you steal a ship? The first thing to do is to take advantage of the fact that ship owners, if they're smart, Never let anybody know who owns their ship. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you do it before there's a claim. I advise all of my clients to register their ships in such a way that they can't be found. After all, and if you do it before the fact of the claim, then you have done nothing wrong. Let's say you own 5 ships. One of your ships is leaving out of Miami. I don't know, the captain is drunk, he's distracted by his girlfriend. For whatever reason, he runs over a 3-mile section of reef just after he turns right out of Dodge Island. The first thing the federal government is going to do is go after every asset he's got, because that ship that ran into that reef is not worth 1/100th the claim of that reef against the owner. They're going to seize every ship he has. They're going to seize his house, his car, his wife's car, his girlfriend's car. They're going to seize everything they can find. So if he's smart from the get-go, he will register that ship in such a way that he can never be found. Without going to all the details, if any of you have a personal interest in the matter, I'll be glad to talk to you privately, but the best way to do that is to find a country that allows bearer shares. Bearer shares are a wonderful, wonderful thing, but they're very dangerous also. If your ship, let's say that your ship runs over that reef, or maybe it hits a boatload of lawyers on the way out. I know. He should get a reward. But anyway, the first thing he does is he goes in the backyard and he digs up the jar that contains his bearer shares and he eats them. Or he burns them, or in some way he destroys them. Now he can never be proven to have owned that ship, because it's only the fact of the ownership of those shares. Now he's running a risk that somebody might find that jar and take those shares. Now he's lost his ship, because even if you can prove fraud, it doesn't matter. Bearer shares are bearer shares. So I recommend that if you own a ship, right away put it in bearer shares in some jurisdiction, which I will not name because it could be pejorative to those countries that allow this, and get rid of them and just take your chances that things will work out badly. Now, the fact that a ship's ownership can't be traced works well in many different ways, because once you steal a ship, of course, you should sell it right away. Don't hang on to it because it might catch up with you. Sell it to an innocent buyer who has no idea that the ship is stolen, and let him deal with the consequences. But there's a better way to do it. This is the way that the guys that I usually have to fight, this is the way they do it. Let's start from the beginning. Let's say that you don't have a ship in mind, but you have a pet judge. That's where it starts, with your pet judge. Now, you need, of course, to find a jurisdiction where pet judges are available and cheap or reasonable. And I won't name the countries but we all know who they are. And in these countries, what you will do is first you find your pet judge, then you find a cargo going to that country. Let's say, for example, that you have a pet judge in Puerto Cabello, Venezuela, just to pull a place out of the hat. Then what you do is you look for a cargo going to Puerto Cabello. That's not hard to find. It's a big port. Cargoes go in there all the time. You guys are probably handling cargoes to Puerto Cabello all the time. So what you do is you go out into the market and you offer to carry that cargo for less than anybody else will. You don't care because you are not going to pay. You're going to make money off this transaction. You can't lose. Unlike other charterers, you can't lose. So what you do is you make a contract to carry that cargo to your pet port. Now you have the cargo. You go out and you find a ship owner. You offer on the general charter market $4, $5, $6, $7 a ton more for carrying that cargo than anybody else will. You know that ship owners don't care about that. They're looking for the highest dollar figure. They are not even thinking about the risk of doing this. So now you've got the ship and the cargo. As soon as it arrives in port, of course, you're going to come up with some made-up claim against it. That's not hard to do. And then the ship gets seized. And now you've cleaned the ship off. Once the ship goes to auction, it doesn't matter what the ship's history was. Even if the man who lost the ship can prove that the ship was stolen and that the judicial sale was corrupt, it doesn't matter. The moment the hammer comes down, the ship belongs to the bidder, and its entire history is finished. There are no further debts. There is no mortgage. There is no history at all. That ship belongs to the new owner, free and clear. It's a beautiful system. Now, You wonder why this is permitted. But when you think about it, it has to be that way. Because if, with the way ships, tramp ships especially, the way they move around, if a ship did not clean off all of its debts when it went to a judicial auction, nobody would buy one, right? Because you wouldn't know what you're buying. You might be buying a ship that has no value or has more debts than its value. So this is many thousands of years old, this international agreement that a judicial sale cleans off all debts. But you know, there's lots of ways that you can use that. What if you're a ship owner? What if you have a terrible mortgage on your ship that you really can't see any reason that you should pay? After all, the mortgage was taken out by, with a, let's say, a New York lender. The ship never calls the United States. No ship owner will pay a debt that he doesn't have to pay, of course. He couldn't compete in the industry if he did. So what do? Take it to a fellow I know in Port-au-Prince. He's a justice of the peace. He has the same training that a justice of the peace in the United States would have, which, as you know, has no legal requirement to it at all. In Haiti, there's no reading and writing requirement because Haitian proceedings are not written down. There's no court record. There's no way of coming back later and say that a certain thing was or was not done in a Haitian court because there is only the decree. There is no record whatsoever. So you take, let's say that you own the ship and you have this terrible mortgage, a really unfair mortgage that you unwisely took out on your ship in a desperate moment, of course. Take it to Haiti, go to this guy up in the suburbs of Port-au-Prince, give him, he'll probably charge you $300, $500, something like that. He will seize your ship for you. Then, of course, the sale has to be published in L'Observateur, the Port-au-Prince newspaper. There is no other notice required under international law. The owner doesn't need to know. The mortgagee doesn't need to know. Nobody needs to know. All you have to do is called notice by publication. We have the same thing in the United States. 3 issues of L'Observateur. Now, how many international ship owners and mortgagees do you think are routinely reading the Port-au-Prince L'Observateur? And the answer is not a lot. I've had quite a few clients, not just in Haiti and other places too, come to me crying bitter tears because their ship has already been sold and they had no idea that it was even going to be sold. It was a completely under the table deal. And there's nothing I can do for them. When I get a ship out of port, I have to do it before the auction. If I do it after the auction, I am committing an international crime. Now, I know there are people who say that I do that anyway, but I do have some morals, as flexible as they are. So I can't act after the ship goes to, because the ship now belongs to an innocent party. Well, innocent party, I don't know about that. Let's talk about ship ownership. We know that nobody knows who owns a ship, right? So why sell it to somebody else? Why not sell it back to yourself? That is exactly what happened to a client of mine who had a $4 million mortgage on a ship. It was in Port-au-Prince. And it turned out the ship was seized for a bogus claim, which you can't prove that one way or the other in Haiti, of course. You just have to pay, like all these countries. It turned out that the guy who seized the ship sold it to himself and then went to operating it. And the only way we knew about it was because this guy was a famous criminal, famous pirate in the Caribbean. And, he wasn't ashamed of himself, and he let it be known that he was operating that ship, and he was the one who stole it. So be sure to get that auction done as quickly as possible when you steal the ship. So the things I'm talking about are not totally confined. Do you need to take notes? So, they're not confined only to ship owners and to people who have an interest in stealing ships. You can steal cargoes. Cargoes are actually more difficult to steal than ships. In fact, when you steal a ship, my recommendation to you is to get the cargo off first, because the cargo is an unnecessary complication. You can always claim that the ship was at fault. It damaged the cargo, or it damaged the dock, or you can always claim something, but it's hard to claim that the cargo damaged the ship. It's possible. We all know that. But it complicates the issue. It's better to go ahead and let the cargo get off first, have your men waiting, and then seize it as soon as the cargo is off. Cargo can be stolen quite easily, actually, though. Let's say you've stolen a ship. Let's get to the point where you're now a ship owner. Proud, honorable, responsible. Of course, you're managing your ship. This is another great thing I love. I go on these ships, And there's a guy, let's say a Greek ship, and there's a Greek guy in the office of the ship. And he's crying bitter tears over some expense that the ship has incurred. And I say, well, you know, who's the owner? Oh, I don't know. He says, I'm just the manager. But he's crying bitter tears over something that the manager doesn't pay for. Of course he's the owner. No owner will admit he's the owner. He's always the manager. That way, when the ship hits the reef or the boat full of lawyers, the manager has no responsibility. He walks away. And the owner, who's just had a full meal of his bearer shares, is no longer the owner. So once you've stolen the ship, now you go out and you find a cargo. Let's say that you stole a ship worth $3 million. Let's say, let's make it a 4,000 or 5,000 ton ship. You can get a nice 5,000 ton ship for $3 million. Now you go to Callao, or even better, Buenaventura, one of my favorite places, Colombia, and you load it with $20 million worth of coffee. Who knows where you're going to go with that coffee? Of course, the coffee always goes to the States, either New Orleans or New York are the two major destinations. But why wouldn't you just take it to North Korea, China? There are lots of places in the Far East where you can sell that coffee, no questions asked. And 4,000 tons of coffee is worth probably, I don't know, $15 million probably. So it's quite often that you can steal a cheap ship and use that to buy to steal an expensive cargo. So when I am called to do a job, I have to be very careful that my clients are in shipping. So it would be rather ingenue of me to say to myself, well, let me do what I can to help this poor man. The first thing I have to do is find out what he's trying to steal from somebody else. Because a lot of times a ship owner will say to himself, this is a terrible thing. There's a $100,000 claim against my ship in Ecuador. I'd better call Max and see if he can get it out without me paying the bill. I've had a couple of guys try that on me, and luckily I've always, because I have a very strict vetting process, and it's pretty easy, as you guys know, it's pretty easy to smell a rat fairly early. And so I've never yet actually taken on a job where my client was in the wrong. I'm pretty happy about the fact that so far as I know, all of my clients have been the victims of these scams and schemes rather than the perpetrators. So how do I do it? Well, the first thing is I can't use force. And the problem is that the guys who are guarding these ships are either the crewmen or guards, military or private guards, who've been hired by the local interest, the ones who are trying to steal the ship. And it would be wrong for me to commit violence against a man, you know, a military guy who's making $10 a month and just trying to survive by enrolling in the army. There could not be anything more immoral than to offer violence to that man. It makes my job a lot harder because I've got to get him off somehow. And, you know, I use a lot of different tricks. I try to stay pretty much on the side of right. I think the worst thing I ever did in that respect, and I still feel a little guilty about it, but I'm still able to sleep at night, is there was one single guard on a ship in Venezuela. I hate to pick on Venezuela, but a lot of my jobs have been out of there. And he was a local guy. He was from Puerto Cabello, and I knew people who knew him. And his mother had medical problems. So it was very easy to have a guy run up to him, a guy he knew. I paid a guy to run up to him and tell him that his mother had just had a heart attack and was dying in the hospital. And as I expected, he ran off as quickly as he could to the hospital, and 10 minutes later we were out. I still feel bad about making this guy think for some minutes, you know, that his mother was in bad shape, but I felt that was at least, you know, if that's the worst I do, I think I can live with myself. A lot of times I use ladies. Ladies are very valuable to me. I hate to bring up the subject of prostitutes in such an august and civilized gathering, but the fact of the matter is that prostitutes are a very helpful resource. Not in the way that one would normally expect, but in the fact that those of you from the countries that I'm talking about know that the United States has a very unique and rather strange attitude toward prostitution. That it's something wrong, strange, illegal, that should be suppressed. Other countries don't see it as that at all. It's just a business. There is one country, the Dominican Republic, in which a large percentage of the Dominican national product is the exportation of ladies to other countries to act as prostitutes. I have run into Dominican prostitutes as far away as there was one house of prostitution in, I think it was Guayaquil, where half the girls there were from the Dominican Republic. And, of course, it's nice for me because I know the Dominican Republic, so I can sit down with them and say, oh, you're from Haina, I know Haina, and the next thing you know, I've got them going on board my target ship and, finding out for me what I need to find out. And I rarely let the girls know what I'm up to. I could find out some other excuse. But, prostitutes are excellent actresses. I mean, it's an occupational requirement. So when I send a girl on board a ship and she tells the captain that he's the handsomest man she's ever seen, of course I hire the best looking one I can, of course, and she tells the captain he's the handsomest man she's ever seen, and she's just crazy in love with him. Of course she works for a chandler, or she works, she has some reason to be on the ship. And the next thing you know, I've got her in the master's cabin. I'm getting a daily report of everything that's going on board, and and one time, in fact, I told this story in another book called Freighter Captain. This was when I was a ship captain, and this was actually the first time I ever stole a ship out of port without a clearance. And that's something that's not normally done. And I was but I was facing losing my ship. My crew were going to be put off, and may well die in the Dominican Republic, because foreign crews they're not like United States citizens that the government will send you home. If you get put off, if you're Peruvian or Ecuadorian or Colombian or Venezuelan, and you get put off a ship in a foreign country, unless your family has the money for airfare home, that's where you're going to die. And I have known people who died in these countries when they were put off their ship by an illegal seizure, like I'm talking about. And by the time I'm called in, it's, of course, later, and I find that men have died off that ship from neglect and lack of medical care. There is a great institution, a wonderful institution called the Seamen's Church of New York, that will repatriate these men, but they have to know about them. And 9 times out of 10, they have no idea that this is happening. So quite often, the crew are not necessarily my antagonists. If I go on board a ship, quite often, if a guy's not paying his mortgage, he's not paying the crew either. He's more likely to pay the mortgage than he is to pay the crew, as a matter of fact. Stealing from your crew is a time-honored way to cut your costs as a ship owner. And if I get on board, or I'll go in the local house of you-know-what, and the crew is hanging around there, and then I'll be talking to them, and I will find out what's going on board. They haven't been paid in 4 or 5 months, and so on. And so the next thing you know, the crew is working for me. And they deliver the ship to where I need it delivered. So this one time when I was a ship captain in the Dominican Republic, they actually had a guard on board, a military guard on board. But I noticed that every time a couple of these girls would walk down the hill in Rio Haina, the road from the houses of you-know-what, are right up the hill, because there's like 12 of them up there. It's a big port, so it can justify 12 houses. And so these girls would walk down the hill, and this guard would be whistling at them. And I said, well, here's a guy who's interested in ladies. And I'm thinking to myself, I've got to get this guy off my ship somehow. So I had a friend who owned one of the houses, a Filipino guy who was a bosun. He was a bosun from the Philippines, and when he retired, he bought a house of prostitution in the Dominican Republic. And since there's so many Filipino crewmen, of course, he got all of their trade, and he was a smart guy. He brought in some Filipino girls. And but they were so popular that the Filipinos actually had to compete for the Filipino girls because the other crewmen liked them so much. But the thing about it is that I got him to send a girl down to the ship to pretend to be friends with this guard. And then I managed to get her to slip him a drink that had something from my medicine chest in it. And as you know, a ship's medicine chest has some really interesting things in it. And so he immediately, she got him to take a heavy drink he said he didn't want to drink, but she said, oh, be a man, And so she said, after you get off work here, we'll go back to my apartment. My roommate is at night school, So he believed every word of it, of course. And he took the drink, and of course he immediately passed out. And then a few minutes later, we were gone. But I suppose I should be guilty about that. But since he wasn't apparently hurt too badly, because he was snoring peacefully when I left him. So I got the ship out that way. I've used a bunch of other tricks as well. One time in Haiti, in fact, this is the story that concludes the book Seized. There were 2 guards on board, Dominican guards in Haiti, and they had a reputation of being violent men. And I had to get them off, but I had heard that they had been selling fuel off the ship that they were supposed to be guarding. Well, of course, there's fuel on the ship. Diesel in Haiti runs for $7 to $8 a gallon. Hello? So they've been selling fuel to all the locals. So I show up and I say, oh, I'm a foreigner with a tugboat and I need fuel and I need a lot of it. And I'd like to come by about midnight tonight and buy a bunch of fuel from you. And of course, they were very happy about that. So I had a tugboat. This vessel could not go under its own power, so I had to bring a tugboat in. Well, that worked out well. The tugboat is coming to get the fuel, of course. So then when the tugboat arrives and the time to pay comes, I have my Haitian tell them, go on board and tell them, oh no, that American, he's too afraid of you. He's an old man, he's scared. You'll have to come on the dock to get your money. And they didn't like that. They didn't want to leave the ship where they were protected. And I had a couple of Haitian policemen with me as well, of course. And so when they got on the dock, my Haitian friends persuaded them not to go back. But I'm a nice guy. I paid them $300 each for the clothes they had to leave behind on the ship. So I've used a bunch of different tricks, and so far they've always worked. I've only been shot at once, and that time I was missed. So normally I'm able to get away without being shot at. So let's go back to your career in piracy. And we're not talking about those Somali type pirates. You know, those guys are really rather uninteresting. I have a very quick and ready answer to Somali pirates, which we don't really need to go into here. But I'm not interested in them. They're too easy to deal with. The guys I deal with are the real toughies. And in fact, interestingly enough, the guys that I deal with could be sitting among you and you would never notice. One time, in the incident that opens, the second incident in Seized, is that story about Puerto Cabello. The guy, it was a crime family, a Peruvian crime family, that had pulled that little trick. And it was just as I described, about having a pet judge, finding a cargo, finding a ship. It all went just as I described. I learned that from them. So about 2 years after that whole incident, and of course everybody knew that I'd stolen that ship out. There was an article about it in the Florida Shipper magazine, so it's hard to hide. So, and I won't say the guy's name. I call him Maldonado in the book, so I'll use that. So I went into a meeting, in a shipping meeting in the Miami River, and I was going to have to deal with this ship dock there for a couple of weeks with the ship I represented. There was a handsome young man behind the desk. He introduced himself, Jorge Maldonado. Well, I looked at him. Well, I know you. I stole your ship once. So I said, oh, I'm Max Hardberger. And his eyes got wide because he knew who had stolen his ship. Or, not his ship, of course, the ship he intended to steal. But the thing about it was, in the circumstance, with all these men around us, we couldn't get in a fist fight. We couldn't do anything. So for 2 weeks, we had to work together. I found him a rather pleasant young man. In spite of the fact that his father, at that time, was still in prison for sinking a ship for the insurance and killing every man on board. That was the way this family operated. And who knows, they may still be operating to this day. The guy that stole that ship that I mentioned in the Dominican Republic that I took back from Haiti, he convinced the crew to commit barratry, which is to convince the crew to do something against the interests of the vessel. The crew was Ukrainian. The owner had not been paying them. And so they stole the vessel and took it to Haiti, and 2 of them died on board. Of course, the guy who stole the ship never paid them for stealing it. He never gave them any food. There's no spare food in Haiti for foreigners. So 2 men died before the Seamen's Church rescued the rest of them. And the moral of that story is that nothing ever happens. That guy, who was, I didn't know at the time, but I've now learned, he's a famous pirate. He's been doing this all of his life. He's an American, by the way. He showed up we took the ship to the Bahamas, which is a great jurisdiction for a seizure. I mean, my client did, because my client was the mortgagee, so of course we have to seize the ship to get ownership of it. So he took it to the Bahamas. Well, this thief actually had the nerve to show up in the Bahamas, claiming that that I had stolen the ship from a completely legitimate Haitian judicial sale, and that the ship should be given to him. And the judge, and this is in the record, it's great, you can find it on the internet. The judge says, "You're lucky I don't put you in jail right here and right now." And so anyway, the sale went forward. My client got his money, but the fact of the matter is that guy's still around. But a few months ago, he was talking to some guy I know, and he told that guy, he said, "Watch out for that guy Hardberger. You know, he'll steal your ship and leave you with nothing." And I thought that was rich, considering that this guy's made a career of stealing ships. All I do is steal them back. So, what can you do? What else can you do now that you have your ship? What other thefts can you accomplish? Well, of course, there's stealing cargo, and there is also a beautiful little scheme called planned abandonment. What you do is you decide when you want to let your ship go, and then instead of paying your debts, you just let them accumulate. And then on your last voyage, and a guy did this in New Orleans and got away with about $1.5 million. Then on your last voyage, you get the highest freight you can, and then you just don't make the voyage. You get your crew off and abandon the ship in the load port. You've already got the freight. Well, you have to do this 3 days after signing and releasing of bills of lading and that stuff, but, that can always be dealt with. And now you've got all the money that you didn't spend on the ship in the last 6 or 8 months, and now you've got the freight, and the ship may be worth only 1/10 of what you've stolen. So just let them have it. In the New Orleans situation that I was talking about, 40,000 tons of Care World Vision wheat were abandoned on this ship, and by the time we got that wheat off, it was animal feed. And Care World Vision, I don't know how many millions of dollars they lost, and the guy was never caught because nobody knew who he was. They found, the federal government did, you can imagine, the federal government sponsored Care World Vision. They certainly did their investigation, and their investigation came up to nowhere. You see, there are jurisdictions, and I'll have to call this to an end because we're getting close to our end, but there are jurisdictions in the former communist bloc countries where you can open an account without giving your name. You open it with a number and a password. Well, that's where the money trail stops, right? Nobody will ever go past that because the bank, you couldn't get the account holder's details if you burn the bank manager's toes off because he doesn't know who you are. Nobody knows who you are. So anytime that you pull it is this sort of setup and these sorts of traditional ways of doing business that allow the pirates that I operate against to do business and to do business continually, to keep operating today. Will the laws ever change? I doubt it. And it is commercial reasons. They are changing in some ways. And the IMO number requirements and other things have slowed down ship theft if they haven't stopped it. But I'll leave you with a very short example of what can be done in this sort of wild and lawless world. We can laugh about ship theft, and we can laugh about colleagues who lose their livelihood and go into the poorhouse because they lost their ship. But now that we are seeing a convergence of terrorism and piracy, we must be very concerned. Now, of course, the Somali pirates have no interest in politics at all. In fact, Al-Shabaab, which is the Somali subsidiary of Al-Qaeda, recently held a meeting with some of the major warlords in one of the major ports there where the ships are being held. And they asked for 20%. And you know what the warlords told them is, get out of town or we'll take 20% of your head off. And so that was the warlords' answer. The Somali warlords are not interested in politics. They may become. But on the west coast of Africa, I don't know if you heard about I forget the name of it. It was a seismic vessel that was attacked off the coast of Cameroon. And it turned out that the operation was planned and funded by Al-Qaeda, or the West African subsidiary of Al-Qaeda. So knowing what I've told you about how ships are owned, knowing what I've told you about how cargoes can be stolen or otherwise described, just think about what you could do with a stolen ship with 40,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which, of course, you have soaked down with fuel oil, because a ship can always get fuel oil. What do ships run on? There's no suspicion in that. There's no suspicion in loading ammonium nitrate. Ships carry it in and out of every port in the world all the time. And yet, with that device, and with the kind of hidden ownership, and with the kind of cleverness that this kind of pirate can bring to the table, coupled with the resources and the infrastructure of terrorists, the possibilities are very frightening. Just remember that it was only 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate, not even soaked with fuel oil, that completely destroyed Texas City in 1949. So that's the end of it. I hate to leave you on a grim note. Perhaps we can lighten the mood a little bit with questions. Anybody have any questions? Surely I haven't covered the subject so completely. What do I do that's legal? Oh, no. Oh, I see. I do some legal things, but not too many. I don't brag about them. No. The answer is, in the country where I'm operating, it's not legal. Obviously, I'm breaking that country's laws by taking a ship out without a clearance. That's illegal. It's not against U.S. law, though. In fact, I don't want to go off on this subject, but there are only two things you can do in a foreign country that are illegal here, and that is bribe a foreign official or have sex with a minor. Amanda Knox, who, if she did murder that other girl in Italy, broke no U.S. laws. So it's a very hard and fast rule of mine, something I've worked out with my bar association, that I won't break U.S. laws, and the other laws the California bar is not so concerned about. So the short answer is it's both illegal in the country where I'm doing it, and it's legal everywhere else. Any other questions? I'm sorry? Surreptitiously. But then I do everything surreptitiously. When I go into a foreign country, I don't go in, I go in by, like, for example, if I go into Venezuela, I'll take a ferry across from Trinidad, or I'll go into Colombia and take a border crossing. I try not to go into the major airports because if something goes wrong and I'm tied to the operation, it could be difficult for me to get out in my socks. So, I have all kinds of disguises. I like to pretend to be a drunken old ship captain, which is not too far from the truth. But all of these ports down there are full of old Americans who've, drifted into the country and are now on their way to death. We call it going native. It's something I've always been afraid of. I examine myself very carefully all the time to see if I'm going native. But, to see me staggering down from one whorehouse to the next, unkempt, smelly, in rags, I am exactly what I appear to be, an old derelict American ship captain who has gone to ground and nobody knows. And, of course, when I bring my crew in, every man stays, my crew all stay in different hotels, and then we never get together until we're actually going to go on the extraction. So I haven't really, even with all the articles and TV interviews and so on, I have still not had any trouble with being recognized. Any other questions? Well, oh, yes, sir.
Where do you find your crew? Is it the same group of people or same?
No, because I only use seamen. I have lots of military people who would like to work for me, but I have no need for military training. I just need sea training, especially engineers. I can handle the deck crew, but I'm lost in the engine room like any captain, like any respectable captain, and I know my limitations. So the most important thing for me is to have good engineers, and they're always, I never work with somebody I've never worked with before. So these are men that I've worked with over the years, and I have to go down my list because some guy will be at sea, another guy will be retired, and so on, until I find a crew. And I try to take as few people as possible, obviously, but my crews come from all over the world. I've never once used an American. Now, it's not that I wouldn't. It's just that there are so few American seamen with sea experience that I just haven't got access to them. They've gone native in America, exactly. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Typical bill to your client for this?
Well, there's no typical bill. It's like any pirate. It's as high as I can possibly make it. I don't handle that. Luckily, my partner, the business side, handles that. But generally, we have a two-stage bill, where the first stage is always the investigation stage, and I always get paid. I always go on the ground first. I would never take a job without investigating it on the ground, both to vet my client, obviously, and to also to see what the real situation is and see what my chances of survival are before I take the job on. Once I've determined the situation, then we submit a bill that's based on basically three things: the difficulty of the extraction, the complexity of the extraction, and the value of the vessel. Like any good salvar, I'm not going to salvage a $10 million vessel for less than some good percentage of its worth. And so far, my clients have cried, and they've moaned, and they've complained, and they've tried to get me down, and then they pay it. Because nobody ever comes to me and says, look, everything is great. The charterers are paying me on time, and my ship is in great shape. I just wanted to call and tell you that. I've never once gotten a call like that. The calls I get are, oh my God, the ship's been seized. I've spent a lot of money on judges, and they've all turned against me. Now what? So basically for me, when somebody hires me to do an extraction, I'm their last resort. It's either paying me what I require, or it's lose their ship entirely. Yes, sir. Ha. I have the greatest of all liens. Once I've stolen that ship out of that port, that's my ship. If you want it back, well, let's look at our contract. But I mean, non-facetiously, under the FMLA, the Federal Maritime Liens Act, my rescuing the ship is clearly a necessary and would be covered by a lien. But I really haven't had any problem with that. Normally, normally our clients are so grateful that in the first rush of gratitude they pay me. Later, of course, they would be, they would try to do the same to me that they do with their other debts. But so far I haven't had too much of a problem with that. Any other questions? Well, I backed into it. I didn't mean to do it. As I mentioned, I was a ship captain, and I did it a couple of times as a ship captain. And then that time in Puerto Cabello, I was working for a Miami shipping company. You guys might have heard of it, Morgan Price and Company, the largest paper exporter in the States. And it was one of their own ships. The company owned 3 ships. And I was a port captain. It wasn't my job to steal ships out of port. It was my job to go to ports and help the master load and unload cargo. But the master in that case, I'm sorry, but it's so distracting here. If you don't mind, I'll put my hand up. The master in that case was so freaked out by the almost certainty of getting caught that we couldn't give him any instructions. Every time I tried to give him instruction, the pilot will be calling you at this moment, you must do this. He kept saying, but the fishing boats. Because in Puerto Cabello, there are all these little fishing boats in the harbor. And he kept saying, oh, the fishing boats, they will report us. And I kept telling him, Captain, those fishing boats don't even have radios. They don't care about you. But finally, the owner was there, and he asked me to take the ship out myself. And like an idiot, I did. And it got into Florida Shipper magazine. And then, obviously, there was a need for this sort of thing. And so ship owners around the Caribbean who, had their ships in that, the word got out that there was somebody insane enough to do something like that. And so, people just started calling me. And I think the first couple of times I tried to do it some other way, and then I couldn't get the ship out some other way. And by then I was so personally involved and felt so sorry for the owner and was so angry at the shore thieves that were about to steal the guy's ship that I just said, well, okay, nobody else will do it, I'll do it. And I just took the ship out, and I started liking it. So that's how it became a profession. And then actually I worked on behalf of owners until 2002 when I met my now partner. He was a lawyer, seizing ships as a lawyer, and he couldn't find anybody to do the actual legwork. So when he and I got together, we now operate mostly for mortgagees rather than for owners. And now we handle it. Before I just did it as an individual, and now we have policy manuals, and we have all sorts of, we're all tied up in organizational matters. And so now we do it as an actual business. We do aircraft as well, not just ships. Oh, I'll tell you one last very funny story about a Nigerian who thought he didn't have to pay for his jet because he took it to Nigeria. The only problem for him was there's nowhere in Africa to repair a Hawker jet. So I knew, and he didn't pay, he had a $2.3 million mortgage. I knew that sooner or later he had to go to Hawarden, England, which is the only repair facility in all of Europe for this type of aircraft. So, and of course, just like Ship Tracker, they're aircraft tracker softwares where you can follow aircraft. So I just had its IN number, and I just kept looking for its IN number, and one day its IN number appeared in Sevilla, Spain. Well, the only reason it was going to Sevilla was to refuel on its way to Hawarden. So I took off for Hawarden, and I got there just in time to meet the airplane. And there was Sam Iwajoku. That was his name. That's his real name. I'm not worried about Sam. And Sam was upset. Sam was mad. Sam didn't like the fact that he was going to have to pay the mortgage on this aircraft that he had stolen. And so Sam, but I had my partner had done his research. We found out that Sam had been in jail in Nigeria for stealing from the Nigerian government and had just been released. So when we had our meeting at the repair facility, Mr. Iwajoku told me, he said, "If I ever catch you in Africa, I will have you thrown in jail." And I said, "Oh, you mean the same one you just got out of?" Which kind of flummoxed him, and he didn't have much to say after that. And it was about 6 months ago that my client did get the aircraft back, because we went through a judicial process, of course, in England. I would never extract anything from England. And so we got our aircraft back, and Mr. Iwajoku was just out of luck. And I'm still not in jail in Africa. Anything else? Thank y'all. Y'all been great.